Hi, Scott Bradford here. It's been a while since I've done a video blog, so I wanted to get reacquainted with you today. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the American automotive industry and bailouts and bankruptcy. So I watched both the Republican and the Democratic National Conventions, at least the major speeches. I didn't watch all of them. And I was struck by a lot of the criticism that Paul Ryan, representative from Wisconsin, the vice presidential candidate for the Republican Party, I was a little surprised by some of the criticism that he got for a comment he made about a General Motors plant that was located in his home district in Wisconsin. The plant had been scheduled for closure when General Motors was having financial problems in 2008, and the plant actually closed down in 2009. During the 2008 presidential campaign, Senator Barack Obama, who was running for president, visited that same plant. It was already scheduled to be closed, and he told the workers at that plant that if he was elected, that plant would stay open for another 100 years. Pretty straightforward promise. As we all know, President Obama was elected. He took office in January 2009, and that plant went on to close anyway. For some reason, though, the pundits and the fact-checkers, they're all saying that Ryan lied about this. Well, it seems to me that the guy who lied was the guy who went to that plant and said, "Elect me president and it'll stay open." Because we did elect him president, and the plant didn't stay open. So somebody lied. It wasn't Congressman Ryan. Another thing that struck me during these conventions, though, is that there's another big lie going around related to the same topic. It has a lot to do with General Motors. Almost all of the speakers, at least the major speakers at the Democratic convention, made an argument along these lines. They said, President Obama saved the American auto industry, saved Detroit, and saved 1 million jobs associated with the U.S. automotive industry. And that industry has come roaring back. But Mitt Romney, he said back in 2008 that we should let Detroit go bankrupt. It's a good line of argument, and it has a couple of nuggets of truth to it. All of the big three U.S. automakers, Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, they're all still in business. And Mitt Romney did write in a 2008 New York Times op-ed that we should let Detroit go bankrupt. That op-ed came out around the same time that George W. Bush was considering an auto bailout. Now let's address these in reverse order. Let's start with that argument that Mitt Romney said, let's let Detroit go bankrupt. Like I said, he did. He did say that. But an important point to point out here is that President Obama actually did let Detroit go bankrupt, except for Ford. Ford has good enough product and good enough leadership that they've stayed solvent all on their own. So let's go back and review the history here. Toward the end of the Bush administration, Congress authorized him to spend $700 billion bailing out banks. This was the Troubled Assets Relief Program, or TARP. Shortly thereafter, General Motors and Chrysler, they came to Congress begging for their own bailout. Now, Congress had been thrown under the bus by the public over the TARP bailouts. It was a bailout for Wall Street moguls. And so Congress did not pass the proposed auto bailout. What President Bush did is he took $147.5 billion out of that TARP money, and he gave it to General Motors and Chrysler instead. Now, only a few short months later, as anybody could have predicted, the two companies came back and said, well, we've run out. We've burned through your $147 billion worth of cash, and now we're teetering on bankruptcy again. And what the Obama administration did was let them go bankrupt. Exactly what he's criticizing Romney for. The difference is that Romney proposed letting them go into the regular Chapter 11 system. Whereas the Obama administration, they kind of prepackaged a bankruptcy plan and handed it to the court. So it was a little more structured than what Romney was proposing. The problem is that the structure wasn't necessarily a good structure. See, what a normal Chapter 11 process would have allowed is it would have allowed for the court to evaluate all the contracts that bind the corporation and to dissolve or refine the ones that are detrimental to the company's long-term survival. So what probably would have happened in a real, in a normal Chapter 11 process is a lot of the union contracts would have had to be evaluated and addressed. And the court very well could have normalized the relationship between labor and the business so that they could get their labor costs in line with those of the other companies that manufacture cars in the United States, because most of the foreign makers make and sell cars in the United States as well. Chrysler went into Chapter 11 on April 30th, 2009. GM followed on June 1st. Now, what ended up happening is that the federal government took large shares of both corporations. The government has pulled out of Chrysler. As of today, Chrysler is about 62% owned by Fiat, which is an Italian automaker. And the other 38% is owned by the unions, by the United Auto Workers. General Motors was initially 60% owned by the federal government, but the federal government has since sold a lot of that off because General Motors has gone public. They're trading again on the New York Stock Exchange. Those shares were issued at $33 per share, and they've dropped since then 30%. They're now hovering around $23.33. According to a White House report that was issued by the Obama administration in August, if the government sold back the 26% of the company that it still owns, because they didn't put all of it on the market, that's 26% of General Motors still owned by us, by the taxpayers. If we sold it today, we would lose $25 billion on our investment. And worst of all, according to analysts at Forbes magazine and elsewhere, General Motors is headed for bankruptcy again, and this is not surprising. I've been saying that all along, because the kind of jury-rigged Chapter 11 process that President Obama and his administration put these companies through did not solve the systemic problems. These companies are still making mediocre cars. They still have astronomically high labor costs compared to their competitors like Honda, like Nissan, like Hyundai, all of these other companies, most of which, again, are making their cars for the U.S. market, many of them anyway, in the United States. Now, you can make the argument that President Obama saved an industry that was teetering on the brink of destruction, but I don't think that's true. I don't think that the industry's been saved. I think its destruction's been kicked down the road a while. I mean, we've lost Chrysler. Chrysler's not even really a U.S. company anymore. And General Motors seems to be heading back down the same road it's been on this whole time. Ford's the only one that's doing any good, and it's the one that President Obama didn't give a bailout to, that President Bush didn't give a bailout to. They've been solvent on their own. So the reality is that there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever to support the argument that the Obama auto bankruptcy saved more jobs than Romney's bankruptcy would have saved. And Romney proposed letting them go bankrupt before the TARP bailout, so it would have saved us, all of that $147.5 billion that we put in there, which, by the way, although they claim was paid back, it was paid back from an escrow account that was stocked with U.S. dollars, with U.S. government investment. So basically what happened was the government forgave the loan. They didn't actually pay anything back. Furthermore, under Romney's plan for allowing Detroit to go bankrupt, which was the plan that I supported at the time, GM and Chrysler would probably be in a better position to grow and expand because they'd no longer be hobbled by some of the very detrimental labor contracts that they're hobbled by today. And so a good argument can be made that letting them go bankrupt in 2008, before the TARP bailouts and before the jury-rigged Obama bankruptcy, an argument can be made that the companies would be better off today, that they'd be bigger, that they'd be more successful, that they'd have more employees. So when we look at the automotive industry in the United States, when we look at these bailouts and these bankruptcies and all this mess that's been going on since 2008, let's look at it clear-headed. Let's look at it with the facts. You can criticize Romney all you want for letting Detroit go bankrupt, but if you're going to do that, we need to criticize President Obama for actually doing it. And we need to criticize him for a bankruptcy that didn't actually solve General Motors or Chrysler's systemic problems. So that's all I got for today. We'll see you again soon.